Hi everyone, today I'm super excited to talk about my top 10 favorite games of 2021. If you don't know me, my name's Delilah, aka ASSASSINA-san. Welcome back to my channel. I imagine a lot of you guys would disagree with my list, so let me know your top 10 favorite games of 2021 in the comment section. Not only am I going to briefly describe each of the 10 games that I picked and why I picked them, but I'm also going to list off the other games that I played that released this year in order of how much I like them to how much I dislike them. So technically this is like a top 20 list, but I'm only going to discuss 10 of them. The others are going to be just listed off at the end. And keep in mind, I did play some remastered games like Alan Wake and Skyward Sword and the Mass Effect Legendary Edition, but I am not going to include those games because they're just remasters of old games. Okay, I lied to you guys. I am gonna talk about my top 11 favorite games because number 11 is just something that I really wanted to talk about because I didn't make a review on it, and also I feel like a lot of people shitted on this game and I understand why they did, but I also felt the need to defend it in some way, shape, or form. So we'll start with number 11 and then I promise we'll go back to our 10 and I won't focus too long on this one, but it's Far Cry 6. Now, I'm not gonna lie, when I first booted up this game, it did feel like every other Far Cry game. You go to an outpost, you shoot up enemies, you take it over, rinse and repeat. When we see the trailers for these games, they make the villains seem super cool, but then we only see them for like 1 or 2 cutscenes in Far Cry games. But for Far Cry 6, we actually saw a good chunk of Giancarlo Esposito playing Antoine Castillo. So even though the gameplay loop is the same as other Far Cry games, you can still get to different outposts and missions in a variety of vehicles, like a horse, a car, a boat, a helicopter. It's really fun. The gunplay is super silky smooth and there's sliding like there is in Apex Legends and pinging and all kinds of stuff that makes this feel like a super polished Far Cry game. And these aren't even reasons it fell on my top 11 games of 2021. I actually felt connected to the story and the characters in a way that I hadn't felt in a Far Cry game in a very long time. I would actually say that this has the best story. And it's not even because of Giancarlo Esposito. I actually felt connected to the main character, Dani Rojas, and all of the companions that she meets along the way. The writing in this game is surprisingly good, and there were definitely some jaw-dropping twists, but I'm not gonna sit here and say that the gameplay loop is innovative or evolves the series in any kind of way, and I hope that this series is no longer annualized so that it can have more time to breathe. But even with it being annualized, I'm surprised how much I liked Far Cry 6. So number 10 is a game that I feel like would wind up on the top of people's lists, or maybe even number 1, but for me, it wound up at number 10 because I liked it, but I didn't love it as much as others, and that is Deathloop. I gotta give this game credit for its innovation. You're basically finding 8 targets and figuring out ways to line them all up so that you can assassinate them in one day. That's really cool. And then you beat the game, that's it. And I really like how contained it is. There's only 4 locations, but you do revisit those locations in different time loops because this is another 2021 time loop game. And you can go to those 4 locations at different times of day and they'll have a completely different vibe, different objectives, and different clues. And because of this time loop system, it can feel a little bit like a roguelike initially, but you do eventually unlock the ability to sustain your favorite weapons and perks. Deathloop has silky smooth gunplay and movement, and the powers are really satisfying to use, kind of like how they were in Dishonored. But this is actually just a puzzle game with really good combat. In the end, what wound up being disappointing to me is that all of the assassinations were completely scripted. I thought that my final loop would look different from another player's final loop, but there's actually a specific way that you're supposed to assassinate all these targets in one day. I thought that there would be more creativity and autonomy involved in that, but it was all very scripted. But at least I didn't realize that the game was setting me up to do it in a specific way until the very end. But hands down, the coolest part of Deathloop is it reeks of style with like funky music and font and the outfits that all of the characters are wearing. It's really stylistic. And although I didn't think the story was that great in the end, I did really like the characters, especially the 2 main characters, Colt and Juliana. Number 9 is actually a surprising cute little indie title that I didn't even expect to play, but thanks to Game Pass, I played it at no extra cost. Number 9 is Death's Door. This game is just charming. The combination of the music, the environments, the use of color, it just makes it a really artistic experience. But even the combat and the puzzle solving were solid. Actually, the combat was pretty challenging at times. On paper, the combat seems really simple. You find items and you use those items against your enemies like you would in a Zelda game. So you get a bow and arrow, a sword, and eventually a bomb. But what makes Death's Door's combat unique and challenging is that every single enemy, regardless if it's a big giant boss or a little enemy, will take the same amount of health from you. 1 bar. And your cute little Crow Reaper character only has 4 bars of health, so regardless if you get hit 4 times by the boss or 4 times by a little guy, you're going to die. But that wasn't even the coolest part about the combat. My absolute favorite is is that the enemies don't have health bars. But you'll still know how much damage you've done to an enemy because their bodies will start to crack and you'll start to see a bright neon pink color. So the more neon pink you see on a character, the closer you are to defeating it. It's really cool. And the bright neon pink contrasts really well with the environments, which tends to be really dull colors or sometimes even black and white. I overall just really like how challenging it is and also how artistic and charming it is. Number 8 is Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart. The reason why it's not higher on my list because it's honestly just another Ratchet & Clank game, which is great. Those games are super fun, all of the quirky weapons are great, and even the new weapons that they introduce are a lot of fun. But this is probably the most graphically impressive Ratchet & Clank game, probably the most graphically impressive game this year. You can see so many details in the distance of every single biome that you're in, and they're all very unique. But the coolest part is that when you're going into a rift, because you know this is Rift Apart, you can see so deep into the biome that you're gonna go into. The graphics and details in the environment just reek new generation. And I also really like the new characters introduced, like the female Lombax named Rivet, and I actually hope that we get another game with those new characters because I like them that much. Maybe Rivet and Kit? So number 7 is actually a game that I just played right recording this video, Metroid Dread. It's been so long since we had a 2D Metroid game, so this obviously tugs at a lot of people's heartstrings. There's just so much polish in these games, and Metroidvanias tend to be really satisfying because you get items as you progress and you're able to backtrack to access areas that you couldn't before in a planet. In Metroid Dread's case, we're exploring ZDR, and they have this really anxiety-provoking enemy called Emmys. And the combination of the anxiety-provoking music and the fact that you can't fight these things makes it really, really tense. You're basically just stealthing past them until you can get to the next objective. It's dreadful. But the reason why Metroid Dread didn't fall higher on my list is because I felt like I faced more roadblocks and had to backtrack a lot more than I did in previous Metroid games. It was like every single time I find an item and I'm able to go through this area, then I face another area that I can't access because I need another item, and I know that's the point of these games, but I felt like it was a little too frequent in Metroid Dread specifically. And also some of the environmental cues were unclear. For example, one ceiling that I had to shoot to get to a secret area looked just like a ceiling that I didn't have to shoot, and it's not till later in the game where you're able to highlight those areas, so I spent most of the game kind of shooting at random walls the whole time. I didn't really like that. But overall, I was really addicted to this game, and I felt like the challenge was a lot of fun. Number 6 is a game that most people didn't have faith in when they saw the initial trailers, but I actually had faith in from the beginning, and it delivered. Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy. So it's an action-adventure game. It didn't innovate in any kind of way, but what makes this game really special is the writing. There isn't a second of this game where you don't hear banter between the Guardians, whether you're exploring the world, or if you're in dialogue with them, or during a cutscene. The dialogue's so good, it made me laugh non-stop, and it really made it feel like a Guardians of the Galaxy game. Even better, it was an original story, so although it has all the vibes of the MCU movies, it has its own characters and its own unique spin. It actually mirrors the comics a little bit more, but it's still its own unique spin, which I tend to appreciate more. I'm also a sucker for 80s rock music, so whenever I would go into an intense combat sequence and a classic would play, I got super duper hype. Plus, the environments are super colorful and pretty, but the most important part is that the narrative was so good, the dialogue was amazing. I laughed so much throughout this game, and I even teared up a bit. Number 5 is a game that I call Creativity the Game, Psychonauts 2. Psychonauts 2 has a narrative about bonds and mental health that's perfectly woven into the gameplay. The main character Raz jumps into people's brains, and those brains become a canvas for like top-notch level design. And everything put into this game is completely intentional. The color scheme of the levels, the activities you have to do in the levels, even the collectibles. And no two brain levels felt the same, making the gameplay feel refreshing every step of the way. The only thing I don't like about this game is the combat. It still remains very clunky. Although it's a lot better than the first Psychonauts game. There is no meat circus, but also there is no milkman conspiracy. But Psychonauts is more a game about puzzle and exploration than combat, so I guess it's okay. It's just really nice to see a game foster a discussion about mental health without feeling so heavy. Number 4 is a game that was actually lower on my list, but as time went by and I had a second playthrough of it, it grew on me. That game is Kenna Bridge of Spirits. An animation team came together, created Ember Labs, and made their debut game a banger. Kenna just reeks of beauty and serenity, and it almost became my game of the year because you collect these cute little creatures called Rot, and they look like the soot sprites from Studio Ghibli films. And they follow you at all times, so if you collect 100 of them, you have 100 cute little creatures following you at all times in the game. It's perfect. But although every character and the environments looked really good, I didn't really connect to any of them. I didn't connect to the story much. But what bolstered Kena for me is the combat. Who knew a game with a Pixar skin would be that sweaty? I personally really vibe with challenging games, but even still, the difficulty scaling was very imbalanced. Like, easy mode was super easy, normal mode felt like hard, and master mode was insanity. But most of the times when I play games for a second time, it actually sours the experience, but me playing a second time on master difficulty actually gave me a deeper appreciation for the combat. But it was still a bit of a lost opportunity that there was no new game plus, so I went ahead on my normal run, got all of the collectibles, all of the upgrades, and I couldn't carry any of that over to master difficulty. But I still really love that in the middle of intense combat, you really had to decide whether you were going to use your raw abilities to heal yourself when you needed it, or hold off so that you can deal extra damage to the enemy. You couldn't really spam healing like you could in Dark Souls game. You had to be really strategic about what you used and how you used it. If this is Ember Lab's first game, I absolutely can't wait to see what their next game is like. Number 3 is a game that I would not at all put on a critical game of the year. It's definitely a personal thing that tugs at my heartstrings. I have a weakness for Resident Evil games, so number 8 is Resident Evil Village. Unlike Ubisoft, Capcom could release a Resident Evil game every year and I'll still love it, and the game will probably wind up on my top 10 list regardless. I'm a sucker for survival horror. The RE engine excels in making environments both creepy and beautiful at the same time. And then Resident Evil 8, which is Village, mashes up gameplay from Resident Evil 4 and Resident Evil 7. But unfortunately, only the first half of the game shined and the second half was like meh to not good. Also, the narrative is a bit of a mess, which is a little bit expected in these games, but I felt like they tried to tie up things from previous Resident Evil games and made things more messy than necessary. And like everyone else, I was a little disappointed that we didn't get more time with the Demetres Castle, because that was one of the best sections of the game, and we know everyone wanted to see more of Lady D's beautiful castle. Number 2 is the game that I actually voted for Game of the Year for the Game Awards, It Takes Two. Hazelight Studios and Joseph Fares at this point create the holy grail of co-op games, specifically couch co-ops, because we don't get many couch co-op games nowadays. Plus, they give you a free friend pass, so only one person has to buy the game and they can share the game with whoever else they want to at no extra cost. Granted, the person with the friend pass can't earn trophies, but most people don't care about that. That's just a me thing. It Takes Two is super whimsical, and it's a game about working together both in the narrative and in the gameplay. It amazes me how many mechanics are at play in this game, and they're all done super well. So one minute I'll be doing parkour and sliding, and the next minute I'm playing Diablo. And it's not like it made the gameplay messy by any means, it just made the gameplay at every single second extremely refreshing. There wasn't a moment of redundancy, everything was different, everything was good. My number 1 pick is not only my personal game of the year, but it's also my critical game of the year. So if my vote had any weight on what is chosen to be game of the year for whatever platform like Game Awards or DICE or whatever, I would choose Returnal. Everything about this game just yells new generation. The sound design, the gunplay, the diverse environments, the eerie music, the ambiguous narrative, which is gonna keep people theorizing for years of what the hell's going on. And of all the games that have DualSense and 3D audio integration, Returnal uses it the best. Most importantly, Returnal feels different from other Sony first-party titles, although when it released it wasn't first-party, but then eventually became first-party, but still, it is very distinct, unique, and innovative. It mashes up together genres like roguelike, Metroidvania, bullet hell, third-person shooting, and it does it in a way that feels intuitive, satisfying, and challenging. Most people might be turned off from the challenge of it, but if you can see from my list, I tend to like challenging games, but I can definitely see the difficulty being a turn-off for people, which is why I don't always recommend it, even though it's my favorite game of 2021. So that's my top 10. Now I'm just gonna list the other games that I played that released this year without getting into why I picked them in this specific order. It'll go from my most favorite to my least favorite. So we'll start from 11 with Far Cry 6, number 12 Outriders, number 13 Back 4 Blood, those games because I got to play with people, which is really fun. Number 14 Nier Replicant, which is a remake of an older game, not a remaster. Number 15 Halo Infinite, which definitely would have fell higher on my list had it released with co-op, because I'm used to playing these games in co-op and it makes it a lot more fun. Number 16 Bowser's Fury, which was honestly just a pack-in with the 3D Mario game, but this game is really good. It's an open world 3D Mario game that's amazing. Number 17 Scarlet Nexus, number 18, Aliens Fireteam Elite, number 19, The Medium, number 20, Biomutant. And I also did play the Final Fantasy VII Remake, Intermission, Intergrade Yuffie DLC, and the Ghost of Tsushima Iki Island DLC, but I don't include DLCs in my list, although those are very good. And had I included them, they probably would have been higher in the list. And I want to make note that I didn't play Little Nightmares 2 or Inscription, and those are games that I absolutely plan to play in 2022, and maybe I'll do a look back of where they would have fell on this list had I played it this year. And I also played 12 Minutes, but I didn't finish it because I didn't like it. And I did plan to look back at my list from 2020 and see where games that I didn't get to play, like Hades, fell, but I actually never got to finish Hades. I only beat the first boss, so maybe I'll let you guys know next year if you care. So that's it. Let me know what your favorite games of 2021 were, what your top 10 were, whether it be games that released this year or not. Maybe it's a game that you finally got around to and you really want to talk about. Let me know in the comment section. And I hope you guys took care of yourselves and each other in 2021, and you continue to do so in 2022. I'll see you guys next week for my most anticipated games of 2022.